My name is Urszula Wojciechowska. I'm the Northeast Rep, and I also sit on the board. I'm delighted to see so many of you here. There's obviously lots of interest in the UK. We have lots to talk about. From the UK dialogues on the future of the transatlantic trade, the second session took place just recently, to the trade deals that have been signed to date. We started with 63 signed. Most of those are all over deals from the deals that the UK had with those countries while it was part of the EU. And apart from that, they also signed deals with Japan and New Zealand last October. And there's a deal signed just recently in Australia. Woohoo! Right. The Northern Ireland Protocol, you probably normally hearing about it and wondering what it is. And the latest proposal to try and streamline the process and make it acceptable to both sides is just being discussed at the moment in Parliament. The idea is to have a green zone for goods that are destined within the UK. So the goods that have been in the UK, moving to Northern Ireland, there's no issue. If those goods are going to be sent to Ireland, there's going to be a red zone. So that's not from me, but I would like to say we have a very esteemed group of speakers today. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague and friend, Emanuel. Emanuel is the Chief Policy Officer of the BritishAmerican Network. So I'm going to leave you to explain more about this.
Well, thank you so much, Urszula, and good to see you all. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having us. It's great to be here and to be talking about the United Kingdom. I know we are competing with India, so it's great to see you pretty much full for the session today in the UK. I have to say I'm really impressed by the conference. First time that I've ever been here. From what I've seen, not much so far, but from what I've seen, I'm really impressed by the offering and the people in the room. Lots of great companies who have also already done a lot of exporting all across the world and investing, in fact, and have turned their ambitions into reality. It's really good to see that and to see a number of familiar faces from all over the US, in fact. It's really, really good to have such a good community of friends and colleagues in the room. Before I begin, let me just say thanks to Urszula for putting this all together and bringing us as a group here on the podium. Thanks to the National Association of District Expert Councils, which I knew but I've never been in touch with directly, so it's really interesting to learn more about what the councils are doing. And I would like to say thanks to my colleagues Sarah and Tim for taking time in their schedules from the British Embassy and the Department of International Trade to join us this afternoon. Very briefly from my end, just to kick us off and set the scene. My name is, as Urszula mentioned, Emanuel, Chief Trade and Policy Officer of British American Business. For those who don't know us, even though I think many of you do, we incorporate the American Chamber of Commerce in the UK, the British Chamber of Commerce in the US, and we work with a network of affiliate chapters all across the UK and in the US. And as you can tell by my accent, I have not exported yet to the UK or invested, but professional and personal reason took me there from Germany long time ago. I'm now a proud dual citizen. I'm currently based in the US. Just to set the scene, I mean, the UK, and you will know that, is a fantastic ally and a great ally to the US, but this is also true when it comes to trade and investment. We'll hear more about this in a moment. A few numbers, however, that I wanted to throw in is that as of today, I checked the numbers this morning, the UK is indeed still and continues to be the 5th largest export destination for the US. That is not only true nationally, but it's also true for many of the states that you're from. I looked up the numbers this morning. For example, Washington, D.C., $577 million of exports to the UK, Pennsylvania, New York and New Jersey, Kentucky also among the 5th or 4th largest export market. I think that speaks for itself. Another comment, and that may come up, given that there's often a debate in terms of agricultural exports. The UK is quite an important destination for US agricultural exports, even though we hear sometimes that it may be difficult. But I think there's always a difference between politics and what happens on the ground. You will know that better than we do. And there's a lot of trade happening there, especially when it comes to wine and beer, tree nuts, prepared food, and soybeans, among others. I'll leave it at that. What we want to do today is I'm very happy to hand over in a moment to my colleague Sarah Clegg, Head of Trade Policy at the British Embassy. We're served, I think, the 4th year now in the US, or 5th even, nearly 5 years. Head of Trade Policy there because I thought it would be interesting for us to get a general sense of where does the UK-US relations stand these days. A lot of things have happened over the past few years, a lot of positive things, but also a few things that certainly raise the question here and there. So it would be great to just get a general feel of where are we. We know that politics informs what happens on the ground. We know what happens on the ground informs policy. So it would be good to start with that. Afterwards, I will hand over to my colleague Tim Crouch, who is the Director for Investment at the Department of International Trade, based in New York. For him to give us a general sense of where is the UK economy these days, and have things changed over the past few years in terms of its characteristics that attract exports and or investment. I may have a follow-up question here and there. Otherwise, I will then take on the floor myself and walk a little bit through the exporting journey. Now, you are familiar with the exporting journey itself, and would be certainly interesting. I know that was the brief for today's session was to see if you are a company based anywhere in the US and thinking about exporting and maybe later investing. Where do you start? What are the mechanisms, the support mechanisms that you can use so that you are in the end successful? And then I've already seen there were a few questions here and there. Some of them have already been shared with me. I will take questions or comments and then walk us through the Q&A. We have, I think, about 45 minutes or so. If we use it, great, but we also don't have to. If we feel after half an hour or so we have covered the ground, then I'm happy to bring the session to a close and then we can continue the conversation on a bilateral basis. I think, Urszula, for that I've done my part. Is there anything else on the no? That is okay, fantastic. So again, it's really good to see you all, and I'm very happy now to hand it over to my colleagues that like British Embassy Head of Trade Policy. Over to you.
Thanks, Emanuel, and thanks, Urszula. Thanks everyone thanks everyone for having us here. As Emanuel said, this is it's a great opportunity for us. It'll be really interesting to hear from you as well. As Emanuel said, I'm the head of Trade and Agriculture Policy at the British Embassy here in Washington. But I have a team that kind of spans the whole of the US, and I can talk a little bit more about that. And obviously, I'm in contact with my colleagues in the US as well, for you to contact them. Emanuel's just made me think by mentioning that I've almost been in the US 5 years doing this role. I just made me reflect on what my role's been like. Before I came here, I had no experience in trade policy whatsoever. I'd been dealing with the Syrian refugee crisis back in London. Before that, EU foreign policy and the previous kind of Ukraine crisis. And I remember coming to this job thinking, wow, foreign policy, it's a bit more steady, something to get my teeth into, and might really think about. And wow, is it different from what I thought it would be? It's been so incredibly interesting, and I think I arrived here at a time when trade policy just completely goes to the agenda. And it's been a fascinating almost 5 years, and I'm staying in the trade policy zone as I make my next move. But anyway, Urszula asked me to talk a little bit about kind of the UK trade policy agenda, and then hone in a little bit on what we are doing in the US and what our ambitions are in that space. So first thing, the name of this session is the UK Open for Business, and I just want to kind of say to you, we are absolutely open for business. With a very ambitious and forward-leaning trade agenda. Since we left the EU, we've completed 70 trade agreements with different countries, in addition to the trade and cooperation agreement with the EU. We are in the final phase of accession to the CPTPP. We have signed an FTA with New Zealand, a digital economy agreement with Singapore. We started negotiations with Canada on 24th of March, and we've had 3 rounds of negotiations with India, who I think we'll be hearing from next. So really, really kind of ambitious trade policy agenda. And of course, the US is a key part of that, and it's incredibly important to us. I mean, Emanuel talked about some of the stats, but you know, our trade relationship is worth $230 billion, and we have $1 trillion investment in each of this economy. And I think there's some statistics about, you know, like 1 million people go to work on either side of the economy working for US and UK companies each day. But in addition to that, we've got historical, cultural, security, economic ties that go back a very, very long way, and that bilateral relationship is incredibly important. I would say it's more important than ever at the moment in the context that we are finding ourselves with Russia and Ukraine, where the rules-based international order is being challenged, and we are working closely with progress on that, including our G7 partners as well. And together, I think we're leading the way on tackling Russia's actions via comprehensive sanctions packages, but also on supporting Ukraine. And last month, our Secretary, our International Trade Secretary, Emanuel, hosted a conference on support for Ukraine and what we can do there in the trade economic space. And I would say, kind of in just kind of touching on that a bit further, in the rules-based trading system, the WTO is also a big part of that. And we will see MC12 happen in June the 12th to 15th. And it's really important to us that that is a success. And I think one of the things that we will want to do there is kind of make sure that there is, it's recognising there is language that Russia's actions are unacceptable. We need the international rules-based trading system to kind of support us in tackling that. Just moving on to kind of UK-US trade specifically, I just want to touch on some of the avenues that we are engaging the US on. Sorry, can everybody hear me?
Thank you very much.
So firstly, back in June last year, we had a revised, a refreshed Atlantic Charter, which touched on the trade and economic relationship. And then also we kind of had an ambitious agenda of G7. We've had some good news and some successes on the resolution of some very long-standing trade disputes. So the large civil aircraft dispute, otherwise known as the Airbus-Boeing dispute, we've reached agreement on that. And more recently, we reached agreement with the administration to resolve the Section 232 dispute, both of which we're seeing harmful tariffs on both sides of the Atlantic. The Section 232 resolution will be implemented on the 1st of June, which will see tariffs on both sides of the Atlantic dropped. And then it's worth me mentioning also the UK-US trade dialogue, which the full name of which is the UK-US Dialogue on the Future of Atlantic Trade. This is something that our Secretary of State for International Trade, Wojciechowska, and US Trade Representative Catherine Tai hosted in Baltimore in March, and then a second leg in Aberdeen in April. And it was both a chance for kind of the two governments to get together and have some real policy discussions, but also, potentially more importantly, to bring together a large group of stakeholders that spanned business, unions, civil society, to actually talk about what the future of trade looks like. And at that dialogue, the USTR and Wojciechowska, our Secretary of State for International Trade, agreed to implement or to ask officials to start implementing an ambitious roadmap. And that roadmap, excuse me for reading, it's quite long, will go into things like delivering practical support for SMEs, digital trade, building resilience in critical supply chains, which is particularly important at the moment given the context in which we're operating, addressing the global trade impacts of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, green trade and kind of looking at how we get to net zero, supporting high labour and environmental standards and addressing things like market distorting practices. And our teams are now going to be working to develop that. And then the one thing I would really like to make a plug for is just as part of that, on the 22nd of June in Boston, we are going to be hosting, jointly with the US administration, the 5th UK-US SME Dialogue. Registration for that is open. We can make sure via Urszula that we get the link out to that because we really want good attendance. I think the focus will be on digital trade. It will be a real opportunity to kind of discuss practical measures to support SMEs across the Atlantic. And then I can't sit here and not mention the UK-US FTA. Up until October, the end of October 2020, we had 7 rounds of UK-US FTA negotiations, and there was lots and lots of progress made, including actually on the SME chapter. We still think that trade agreement is vitally important and actually more important in the post-COVID environment and in terms of allies needing to work together on rules-based trade. And I think it's also an opportunity for us to go further, looking at things that might be aligned with the US on high labour standards, high environmental standards, wanting to support SMEs, innovative economies, We recognise that the administration is very domestically focused at the moment, and we respect that, but just to say that we are ready and we're there when the administration kind of wants to get back to the table. And then the final thing I would say is just, we also recognise that it's not just about engagement at the federal level. And Emanuel kind of talked about some of the statistics on UK trade with individual states, and that's one of the things that we're really focusing on at the moment. We want to really look at deepening our trade and economic relationships at a state level, working together, looking at how we kind of break down barriers to trade, but how we kind of deepen that relationship broadly. And we have got some information on kind of how stats on how trade in the UK supports jobs in growth in states. And again, it's kind of going in that direction. But I will be quiet there and just take the questions later.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that great overview of where the UK economy stands. Indeed, very positive, as I always said. It triggered a number of follow-up questions. I will only have one or two right now before we hand over to Tim. One of which is, you've indeed spoken about the state-level engagement the UK government is currently doing. And if I'm not mistaken, I think a couple of weeks ago, the UK government signed a memorandum of understanding with the state of Indiana around technology and cooperation. How can that translate into tangible benefits for our partners here in the audience, if there is something signed like an MOU?
Thanks. The Indiana MOU, I think, is forthcoming.
Okay.
So watch this space on that one. I mean, again, the first thing to say is we recognise that, I suppose, the competency and the US Constitution and what can and cannot be done, and we recognise that we can't be signing trade agreements at state level. What I think is, as we are deepening our cooperation and looking at kind of memorandum of understanding with states, I think it's more about actually starting that dialogue, starting that cooperation, working together on issues that affect us and the states in question, whichever state that may be. And it might be kind of deepening cooperation in sectors that matter, supporting trade missions, supporting business, supporting SMEs. But there might also be opportunity to kind of look at kind of regulation and how we operate on that in the future, where it is in state.
Sarah, I wonder if I might just sort of add a practical example on that. So thinking about the work of our teams on the UK Connecticut InsurTech corridor, that would be a sort of really good practical example where you've got an industry that's clearly critically important to the state of Connecticut, but where there's also a strength in the European context of the UK. So actually collaboration across the industry, alignment of practices and standards that doesn't interfere with exactly what Sarah was talking about, sort of the jurisdiction of federal government here, but nonetheless actually builds trading links between the UK and the state. So that would be a kind of good practical example of what that looks like from our perspective.
Thank you so much, Tim. Maybe we stay straight with you. It would be great if you could introduce yourself and also what it is that you do for the UK government. And maybe, if you don't mind, also give us an idea of how many colleagues does the UK government actually have across the US? Because the UK government does something really great, which is that they put people on the ground where we live and work. So it's not only here, it's not only in New York, but there are many, many other places where you can actually find local representatives who work on behalf of the British government in order to help companies expand. And then, as I mentioned in the beginning, give us a little bit of a flavor of where does the UK economy stand these days, and have things changed, or are they as good as we've always thought they are?
Yeah, no, of course. So my role is the Director of Investment for the UK, covering North America. So US and Canada, in total 13 offices. It's about 150 people who work on export and investment promotion work across those locations. I guess in a sort of US context, think of us as a sort of a mashing together of a bit of commerce, a bit of USTR, a bit of Select USA, and a bit of the commercial service. And that's sort of what sums up the UK's Department for International Trade. Maybe as a bit of a shorthand, if Sarah is the commerce and USTR bit, I'm the Select USA and commercial service bit, if that sort of helps give you a reference point. But I think that the important thing for us is actually when we talk about those 150 people, actually 147 at latest count are outside the Beltway. And for us, actually, that's critically important. It's not that work here in DC isn't important, but actually we need to be visible on the ground, working hand in hand with both US companies wanting to do business in the UK and UK companies wanting to do business with companies here. And we're working in both directions on both export promotion and investment promotion in the UK. I guess thinking about the sort of the UK economy, what the picture looks like. So clearly the UK context changed in 2016, or I guess more accurately, more recently than that. But the context changed when the UK voted to leave the European Union. But I think for us, the critical thing about the way we position the UK and what we think makes it a really compelling market to work with is that we place a really heavy emphasis on getting the fundamentals right. So for us, yes, we're the 5th largest economy in the world, but it's an economy of whatever it is, sort of 66, 67 million people who are early adopters in technology, highly educated, and open to doing business with companies from elsewhere. It's a highly connected market, both in terms of digital connectivity, but also the kind of very practical steps. When you think about ease of getting people in and out of the UK, actually, I think the last time I checked the number of direct flights between LAX and London Heathrow as a kind of reasonable case study, I think there was a choice of 8 or 9 direct flights per day. I think the next most well-served locations, either Frankfurt or Paris Charles de Gaulle, with 2, which is just to sort of give you a sense of scale of how connected the markets are. And it includes with connections to other cities, opening up routes to cities like Austin with a direct flight. And I know actually for cities that we work with and states that we work with, that connectivity is critically important because it brings not just tourism, but it brings business people back and forth between the 2 markets. I think the next thing, I mentioned the UK has a highly skilled workforce. I think critically important, it's a highly skilled workforce backed by exceptional universities. Latest count, 4 of the world's top 10 universities are in the UK. The other 6, of course, being here in the US. And I think, again, to illustrate the sort of compatibility of the 2 markets, deep research tradition, exceptional universities, high levels of talent, and a very flexible labour market, which, again, sort of using the US equivalent, we sort of position as being the equivalent of at-will employment for the first 2 years that you recruit someone for. You will not get that level of flexibility in any other European market. So again, that's a sort of a way I hope to illustrate the idea that the UK is just trying to get the fundamentals right. We're an open economy. It's an easy place to do business. We're highly connected to our most critical markets, of course, the most critical of which is here in the US. And it's a vibrant ecosystem in the UK for a wide range of sectors. I wonder if just the only other thing I'd say as we think about the role of government in that process, I think for me, I've worked in this field for 8 or 9 years, and before that was in London working in a few different central government environments. I'm struck actually by the difference of the current administration in the UK, how clear a vision they have for the UK economy they want to see. It's starkly different to any administration that I've worked with before. And I think I'd boil it down to really 3 things. So as you're thinking about the UK and the future policy direction for the UK, and where opportunities are going to be most robust. For the UK, it's really, I think, 3 things. First is the UK's pledge to reach net zero by 2050. That's going to be a critical thing to define a lot of what the UK government does, a lot of where we prioritise our work here. We're the first major economy to make such a pledge, and we're proud of that. That's I think, a differentiator for the UK. The next thing is around actually the extent to which the UK is levelling up our economy. You might have heard this phrase, it's sort of, it does the rounds in the way that sort of Build Back Better does the rounds and so on. Levelling up for us is actually ensuring that the spoils of the free trade that we're all here to promote, the economic growth that's so critical to all of your markets and of course the UK as well, is actually shared equitably. So it's not just London and the South East, which have been robust markets for a long time and have stayed robust through the worst crisis that we've seen over the last 20 years. It's ensuring that the spoils of that growth are shared across the north of England. It's shared across Wales and Northern Ireland and Scotland. But they're also shared across different groups within the UK who might not have traditionally benefited from sort of booming growth in key markets. So that, in practice, means we try to put our money where our mouth is and run trade missions that actually address that problem. So just earlier this year, we ran a Black Founders mission to the US, where we brought UK companies and their founders out to the US and connected them with not just VCs that potentially fund their next round of growth, but also the companies that are interested in the products and services they provide. We've done the same with LGBTQ+ founders and brought missions out to the West Coast and the East Coast. Again, because we know that this is a critical thing we want to address, we believe there's a role for it. And then the final thing, I said there was 3 things, so net zero, levelling up the UK economy. Maybe the final thing is trying to position the UK as a genuine science and technology superpower. So we already know that we're exceptional and world-class in some critical areas of science and tech. So UK, you could sort of make a pretty good case, is the world's leader in fintech. It's a vibrant ecosystem in London. There's huge amounts of funding going into it. We produce quite a significant number of unicorns, some of which then set up here. Actually, so companies like Wise would be a really good example. I think they recruited 300 or 400 people in the US market last year. But it's trying to build that out across other key areas of science and technology, where we back specific areas with government funding matched to the private sector. So a good example of that from the fall of last year was a joint investment from Bill Gates' Breakthrough Energy, the UK government, to invest in future hydrogen technologies. That was, I think, £400 million, $500 million at today's prices, match funded to invest in future hydrogen technologies. And for us, that's critical. That's how we think we'll position the UK as a science and tech superpower, and hopefully then a very good place for companies to work.
Thank you so much. And that is actually a good example for why it's always good to listen carefully at what's happening on the policy side, because of course if there is an emphasis on the policy side, like for example green tech or renewables, there are usually opportunities connected to that. And I don't know whether colleagues here are from North Carolina, but there's a good example there where a number of British companies have either invested in North Carolina or where the British government works very closely with local firms who are experts in their fields and have technology that they can then sell to their UK counterparts or partners across the Atlantic. I have a couple of follow-up questions for you, Tim, but I wanted to also give a heads up already to my colleague Richard Briggs, and later maybe if Paul Stanislav comes back in a moment. We had a chat earlier. It would be quite interesting for you to share with us maybe in a moment what you feel are currently the biggest questions for US exporters when they look at the UK or generally abroad, because that will be a good segue for me. And then once Paul is back, it would be good, given that you, Paul, have been in our bubble for a long, long time, if you wanted to share what the general perception of the UK is these days in the US. It's always interesting to hear, how do people think about the UK, and why are you in this room and not next door? Even though, of course, you may be able to then swap notes afterwards. But a couple of follow-up questions for you, Tim, that we received ahead of the session. One of which is that if I am, in quotes, a US exporter, I have a product that successfully makes it into the UK, to what extent can I still use the UK as a bridge into the EU? And then what is the moment where I, as a US exporter, can take advantage of the trade agreements that Sarah mentioned, that the UK has with the rest of the world? Again, US exporter bringing the product into the UK, either by a distributor or because I have a branch there, from when on can I use the trade agreements, and can I use that as a bridge to the EU still?
Yeah, so I think there's two parts to how I answer that. So I think the first thing for us, we actually, the moment a company has a UK entity set up, we can work with that entity as an exporter. If you like, they become part of the family, and we can then kick in the way that a commercial service would. So the moment you have a UK subsidiary, that UK company is one of ours, and we'll help it as we would any UK company. I think that positions us quite differently to how a lot of other governments might work. We'll work with a UK subsidiary to help them export into third markets.
In terms of that, the scenario is a U.S. company that wants to move their operations or move and operate in the UK in order to start exporting to Europe. What is the requirement to make that happen?
So it just simply needs to be a UK incorporated subsidiary. So it's a pretty straightforward process to set up a company in the UK. I think it's 24 hours. Latest, I think £20 to register a company. Obviously, a bit more paperwork to ensure your articles of incorporation. But that would presumably be a wholly owned subsidiary of a US parent. But the UK company we work with is one of our own.
I think that's an important point.
Yeah, where the profits get repatriated, we're easy about. The fact that the UK entity is the kind of one that's exported to the markets, to support. And then I think the other thing, because of that approach, we built out a lot of information to help companies navigate the change in processes for exporting from the UK to the EU. That was clearly critical for our domestic market because a lot of UK companies do export to the EU. So the fact that we've built that out actually for a UK subsidiary of a US parent, those same challenges often apply. For the sort of practical help, that's also one of the reasons why we have 150 people spread across the US, because we want to kind of actually get hands-on with companies and provide that support directly. For the more generic stuff, there's a website, as you'd expect. I think it's invest.reg.gov.uk that will get you into the right place. But actually, talking to a person usually the easiest first step, and we've got plenty of them.
Thank you very much, Richard. Why don't you, if you don't mind, either we use the microphone or your voice carries enough, or I repeat what you say. But again, it would be quite interesting to see from your perspective what you feel have been issues that came up recently among US companies when looking at the UK market. That builds a beautiful segue to what I have hopefully to say. And then again, Paul, if you wanted to later, either you or someone else, it would be just good to see what the impression is of the UK, not only in DC, but also in other parts of the US. Richard, over to you.
You said issues.
Issues, yeah? Is there only one? Or not? Even better.
American companies with issues into the UK. Just trying to understand the question.
Well, the question is, when you look as a US company, either to expand or export to the UK, we've just learned it takes 24 hours to set up a subsidiary. So that seems to be a fairly straightforward process. But there may be other things that you've come across in your work where you feel, if that was a little bit smoother, if that were to be addressed, it would accelerate the process even further.
Maybe I should introduce myself. I am the outgoing chair of the British American Business Council in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm a DEC member out there as well, and work for a consulting firm helping with FDI and market entry. So we are dealing with a lot of companies, American, UK, and from elsewhere, going into a lot of markets. And quite frankly, the UK is the easiest place. We advise for a number of reasons companies going into India, Germany, Latin America, wherever. Our comfort zone, because we know it's a known factor, going into the UK is typically a lot easier than other places. We know that there are many, many levels of assistance that are open to American companies as they look to go international. And in fact, we often advise American companies that have a product suitable for international markets to go and cut their teeth in the UK. And that is a really good strategy. We have a lot of American companies that have a great product or service that are looking to eventually end up in the very large Indian market next door. They go and cut their teeth in the UK, and they find that there are a great deal of resources and a lot of knowledge based in the UK to help them go to the next step, which is India. Just as we find a lot of Indian companies prefer to start off in the UK before they head over to the US. So I wouldn't say there are a lot of issues. I would say there are a lot of solutions available from a lot of different places, including Tim's group.
He's part of the solution. Here we go. Thank you so much. Tim, jump in and then I jump in.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I always think it's good to be honest, isn't it? I suppose working with a number of businesses we do, we do encounter some of those issues, and part of our reason is to try to iron them out. Also, it's an easier process to invest in the UK or to do business in the UK. The one that sort of repeatedly comes up is actually the challenge of setting up bank accounts in the UK for international businesses. So getting your banking services sorted for your UK subsidiary. And for lots of good reasons, because the UK cares about money laundering and national security. We have really strict requirements around setting up bank accounts for non-UK citizens. So we've worked really hard to find different solutions working with the market so that businesses can get access to banking solutions from day one in the UK. And that's required some lateral thinking, working with companies like Wise and Monzo, the fintech disruptors, who are able to provide quite innovative solutions that give companies banking access from day one in the UK. Rewind 2 or 3 years ago, and that was more challenging. It's not to say anything against any of the sort of big established banks, but they're working in a different sort of context to the fintech startups. So we worked directly with the fintech startups to ensure there was a solution in place. So I think maybe that's to sort of illustrate, even where there is an issue that companies have to deal with, and exporters have to deal with, there's a willingness to think about how we solve it. And I think a track record also.
And that maybe a tip from my end. Sarah was already mentioning those different forums, such as the SME dialogue or local engagements that, for example, the Trade Policy Minister, Wendy Morgan, is driving across the United States. Well, this is of course often a policy discussion. It's a perfect way to actually address an issue and to put an issue forward. I've had a number of examples where the US company was able to sit next to a UK secretary and was able to say, this is currently something I'm really struggling with. And that issue from there on made it really all the way through people like Tim or me, and then we're in the end addressed. So, which is why I think it's always a good idea to look into what's currently happening. And I will get back to you in a moment, Sarah, to just learn more about why you think it would be a good idea for those based in the Boston area to sign up for the SME dialogue, how they can potentially also contribute. But building on what Tim just said and Richard just said, on my end, as I said, many of you have businesses that have already successfully exported, so you know that the key recipe for success is that you are ambitious and that you want to actually expand outside of the US, and then that you look into a proper market analysis for your product in the market, and in the end that will decide and define where you want to go. And that is not really something that we, from a government or from a business association side, can really do. That is something that you will have to do. We are here to ask you the right questions, but you will understand your product best. But of course, there are a couple of things that may also define, whether it be India or the UK or both, or maybe another market. And one of which is, you mentioned it, opportunities that happen on the political level. I mentioned North Carolina and other parts of the US where the UK government is primarily driving a number of initiatives, insure tech, renewables. It goes really across the board. where there's a business to think, okay, we can actually dock onto that and use the opportunities. Maybe there's even funding involved. And the other part is, and I think that's part of our brief here for this afternoon, is what is and where is a good existing support network. And so you've already mentioned 120, 150 colleagues, 150 colleagues across the US. That can make a difference, that you have someone on the ground. What we as British American business do, as I mentioned, we have chapters all over, and Richard mentioned he is outgoing chair of the Pacific one. We try to bring this all together as far as we know. So you have already a great starting place with the district expert councils, where we have local expertise, which I think is fantastic. We've learned about the British government that they have colleagues that can assist, primarily, especially if you think not only about exporting, but also potentially investing afterwards or setting up a subsidiary in the UK. You will all be aware, and I looked at the website of the council, that the International Trade Administration, US Commerce, Commercial Service, does a lot. In fact, I spent yesterday afternoon just really digging quite deep into their website, and it's fascinating. You can, you have graphics, you can look into specific market studies. They can give you even lists of potential importers and so forth, distributors and here and there. So I think that is a very, really good base. I know that US Commerce also has offices across the US that are often linked up with the local chambers of commerce, so often a good place to start a conversation. What I wanted to also mention though is that, and that is something maybe you don't have on radar, is that the US Embassy in London has actually a team that is tasked to help US exporters. So it's not only tasked to bring investment into the US, but it's also tasked to bring exports into the UK. So especially if you look, for example, for a tender, for public tender, going into a public tender, looking at a larger project, you could reach out to the US Embassy Commercial Service there in London and ask them for their assistance. As I mentioned, we as British American business, we try to bring this all together, and again, I don't think that's necessary for many of you, but one of the things that we do, often in partnership with the British government or with our US colleagues, we offer a number of trade clinic sessions, we call them, where you could, for example, send us an email and say, I'm business X, that's my product, I'm keen to expand to the UK, what is it you think I should be doing? And what we will do is we have a half an hour conversation, as we would potentially do after this session, and pretty much tick off the boxes, what is the product, what you've done so far, are you already exporting somewhere, expanding somewhere, and then see what you're potentially missing, and then, for example, introduce you to colleagues at the US Commercial Service or to check. Speaking of which, if we wanted to find you, how can we find you? I mean, we have now seen you, and we know that you have this wonderful title and a network of colleagues all over the US, but if one of us said, I really need to speak to this gentleman, how would we even find you?
Yeah, and today a distinct lack of business cards, which we found out as well. So, I mean, on a personal level, I always find LinkedIn's probably where to connect.
Are you happy for people to reach out to you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
But in practical terms, we have consulates in 8 cities across the US, 4 across Canada. They're in LA, San Francisco, Chicago, Houston, Boston, Atlanta, Miami, and New York. And of course the embassy here in DC. And we have Department for International Trade personnel in each of those offices. In practice, actually, they in some of those offices, they make up the majority of our staff. So if you take Los Angeles as an example, I think 17 of 30 people who work in that consulate work on trade and investment issues. So I think it's a sort of measure of how important that is. So I think actually the best route in, I can help facilitate that. The best route in is always through one of our local teams. And actually co-located with them in many cases with one of Sarah's team. I think sort of maybe 5 of those 8 places will have one of Sarah's team also co-located, working on not just the sort of company interaction, but the state and political interactions that improve the trading relationship, not just the sort of company to government relationship.
Thank you so much. So we know how to find Tim from now on, so that we'll be prepared for a number of messages on LinkedIn. Sarah, over to you. A couple of questions here. One is, what is it you think would trigger for some of our colleagues here in the room to sign up for the SME Dialogue in Boston, and what we could potentially get out of it. And then I was just shared also, thank you so much, a question that some of you sent via email, which is around Ukraine. Would be just interested to hear how the US and the UK are currently linking up or doing efforts vis-a-vis the Ukraine. And maybe linked to that, that's of course now makes it a little bit complicated. We have of course a supply chain question right now, whether this is something that sits in your portfolio, if you could comment on that.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Emanuel. I just wanted to come back on a couple of things that both you and Tim have said. I mean, firstly, on how to reach us, again, same as Tim, I'm on LinkedIn, but I think definitely for kind of you and your teams out and about across the US, that first offer point, consulate, where you have some of Tim's team and then trade policy colleagues working alongside them, and actually they do an awful lot of outreach, and they can really kind of support you. And just thinking back to what Emanuel said about, getting involved and letting us know what your issues are. I mean, I work on the policy side, which is all about kind of looking at where barriers are, what we need to do with future regulation to prevent barriers in the future, how we take forward some of our aligned goals on net zero, on levelling up and build back better, like how we do all that on the policy side. And actually, it's so important hearing from you about what the problems are, or what the ideas are on solutions, because we can then feed that back into the system as the policy develops. So just with that, I would encourage you to reach out to our teams and let us know about that, because we can work with that and feed that back into the system. I can't promise that we will solve everything, but the more information we have, the better. And I think that then comes back to what Emanuel was saying about the UK-US SME dialogue. As I mentioned, this will be the 5th UK-US SME dialogue in Boston on the 22nd of June. Previous dialogues, that they stalled basically because of COVID, but previous dialogues have taken place in DC, in New York, in Bristol, in Portsmouth, back in the UK, and they've been fantastic. And I would say they do 3 things. They give you access to senior people, senior officials from the UK and US governments. And that's both to hear what support there is, but also for you to have your say. The dialogues at previously have really been a dialogue, and there's been an open sharing of views, so you could go to the dialogue and you could hear useful information, but you could also feed in your views. And it's an ideal opportunity to kind of meet other SMEs and companies and to kind of make connections and share best practice. There's been a lot of information that has been created in support of SMEs from the previous dialogue. There's definitely been, there's brochures available, in particular on things like kind of how you navigate intellectual property regulations in the UK and the US. So I would highly recommend it. And actually, the dialogue is done in conjunction between not only kind of the UK government and USTR, but also Department of Commerce and the local Department of Commerce on the ground in whichever city is taking place. As I mentioned before, what we can do, registration is open, so I can send a link to Urszula to make sure that you have access to that. And then on Ukraine, I mean, there are numerous things we're doing. We are working as closely as we can with all allies, and obviously the US is an incredibly important ally in our shared values on democracy and the rule-based international order. I would say we've been pretty aligned in terms of our response to Russia, in terms of sanctions, and their very, very strong sanctions packages, including the trade and economic space, but also on how we support Ukraine. I mean, I noticed just before I got here that Congress has just approved a package of support for Ukraine, and obviously kind of that will span, kind of how you support on the military side, but also how you support Ukraine in terms of potentially lowering tariffs to ensure that they get the goods they need, etc. So I would say we are generally working across the board, not only with the US, but the US is an incredibly important partner for us, but with our G7 partners, and also, as I mentioned, it will be a priority for us at the ministerial conference at the WTO in June.
Thank you so much. We have about 10 minutes left, so I'm very happy to take additional questions on the floor. Paul, if you wanted to kick off with a comment or a question, I have to take you first. Then a number of you have done a fantastic job of fielding questions towards the end of the session. So I have my table covered. Happy to walk through them, but I wanted to give colleagues in the room the chance to speak first before we take those. Over to you.
Thanks, Manu. My name's Paul Stanislas. I'm on the board of the British American Business Council in New England. I really just wanted to reinforce that the business councils across the country are always open for connection, particularly Boston, because of our bioscience area. Very, very strong university connection between business and universities, both from the US to the UK and the UK to the US. An enormous amount of business going on. So if anyone wants to make connections and can't get through to the consulate, although the consulate in Boston is 29 staff strong, the British American Business Councils across the country are always open for. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And again, it's great to see that colleagues in the room that are not only successful business owners themselves, but also are linked up to the British American business community all across the States. I have my eyes open, so here we go. Question over there, please. And then another question there. Either you take one of those roaming micro. Yes, perfect. Maybe we kick off over there, and then we have you again.
Is that right?
Thanks so much for assisting. Perfect. And feel free to also introduce yourself so that colleagues in the room know.
Great. My name is Ken Mossel from Ian Mossel Associates. What we do is we help U.S. Companies expand internationally, and UK is a major market for all of our clients. The biggest issue that they're facing is a very practical one, and that is the UKC. You know, they have the CE mark, and I know starting in January of 23, they got to have the UK CE mark. So they're trying to figure out how much difference that is, authorized representatives, all the practical states that actually do that, and how different is it going to be. Can I just copy my CE mark technical documents and make it the UKC technical documents, or am I starting from scratch?
Fantastic. I just wanted to see whether any of you had a comment on that. It's not my field of expertise, I have to admit.
Yeah, I would admit it's not mine either. Perhaps let's connect afterwards, and I'll make sure that you're plugged into the right people. Yeah, that's a step beyond.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I would say the same. Just hearing that is useful though, because we can kind of.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
First of all, I'm New York pleased with the Arkansas District Court Council.
Great.
What the gentleman said is in fact an issue for us.
Okay, great.
It's something that I hear all the time, so it definitely needs to be taken into account. I had the pleasure recently of helping host the UK's state minister, Clegg, in Arkansas about a month ago. And I said something to her that I'd like to say to you guys, because you're the obvious, right? And that is that there would be a significant, in terms of the UK-US free trade agreement, it would be a significant mistake if the operators did not understand that the jobs in every state are going to be key to make that happen. In terms of politics and legislature, that's not going to happen that way. It's going to happen with American businesses going to their representatives and telling them, we want this to happen. And I mean, something I think is different in the UK and the United States. And so, to the degree that you guys can work with the various DECs and DEC regions to help you make that happen would be very useful.
Well, thank you so much. It's a very important comment. I think that applies to many, many things, not only to trade, but to trade agreements also, that the case for trade is not only being made in Washington, D.C., but actually where business takes place every day. So the comment is very well noted. I don't see any further questions in the room, at least not in the public forum. So what I will do is I will take final question from Urszula, which I just have in front of me, and then I offer Sarah and Tim just a moment for a final word on your end. anything you would like to conclude with, then we bring the session to a close. And as I said, feel free to afterwards come up to us if you wanted to ever get more content details or just have a question bilaterally. So the question I have from Urszula, and I knew that Urszula would put me and us on the spot, is around the famous word of B, Brexit. The question is, to what extent it still matters for businesses? And you know what, I will take that question, because I was working in the UK for the past 10 years, and one of my jobs was to work with American companies and indeed to embrace the decision by the UK to leave the European Union. And we did a survey in 2016, right at the time of the referendum among US companies primarily, and asked them whether they felt this is a decision that works for them or that is in their interest or not. And it was no surprise, 95% of all American businesses said in that survey that they feel the UK would be better off in the EU. And of course, we have seen that there were a number of stories in the newspapers that we talked about that drain that drain of companies, the companies would relocate and so forth. The answer, however, what we have seen is that that did not happen. Of course, we saw adjustments left and right, but when it comes to US companies and the activities in the UK, we actually haven't seen much change. And that is particularly true. And again, I need to be careful here because we always have to look into how we interpret numbers. But when it comes to US companies exporting in the UK and potentially establishing a subsidiary, we have not really seen any change. And the reason is really what Tim explained, is that the parameters for the UK haven't changed. The UK is a very vibrant economy. The UK still has the attributes that we've always been known the UK for. So that means that if you have a product and you know that the audience is in the UK, you will be able to sell that product in the UK. The decision whether the UK is part of the EU or not will not really affect it in any way. Again, there may be adjustments here and there, and you may have to look into new things that the UK is not changing as a consequence of the decision. But overall, it has not changed the business environment, which is why we didn't even make this part of the conversation today, because it does not really have any huge impact. I would often even say, and that is controversial, politics is one thing and policy, but what really matters, at least to this conversation, sometimes is what happens on the ground, and indeed how easy it is to get a subsidiary done in the UK. The CE mark, can we solve that in time, and how do we have access to people who know what they're talking about, Tim and others, to get our product over the Atlantic. I leave it at that, also I hope that's okay, and hand over to Sarah and Tim for some concluding remarks.
I think just to hope that the message received here today is that the UK is a business and we want to do business with you. The US is hugely important to us for all the reasons that we've set out and that I set out at the beginning of the session. And that we've got teams there to help you, to engage with you. And absolutely thank you for the offer of our teams being able to dock in with the local NADEC affiliates, because I think that is important. I think all politics are local. It happens in the UK as well. We can get that message to from grassroots upwards. That would be fantastic. So we will definitely take on that.
Next step, Tim.
Yeah, I think maybe the only other thing I'd add, actually Brexit doesn't matter. Well, with anything that's a change, there's opportunities and there's challenges, and we've talked actually about some very specific challenges. I hope what you've also sensed is that actually this is a group of operatives. I think it's a colleague from the National Study said it, who actually really care about maximising the opportunities, whether that's new free trade agreements, whether that's the state to government bilateral MOUs, whether that's ensuring that the fundamentals of the UK just are really sound and we maintain that competitive advantage. It shows up in the surveys, whether that's EY's competitiveness survey, where we're number one most recently, or that E.T. Carney's CEO conference, where latest fourth, I think we went up a couple of places last year. So actually, when you sum that together, I hope this is an impression of a country that's trying to maximise the opportunities inherent in that.
Okay, well, thank you from my end, from our end, for having us. It's been an honor to spend some time with you. Feel free to use the chance afterwards to engage with us bilaterally. But it was an honor to be here and an honor to be invited to this conference. Hope to see you again. And leave the final word to Urszula, who brought us all here together.
So to say that I think we all see that the UK is now open for business, so we'll all see them there.
Thank you.